Generally, what we hear from the movies and social media about human trafficking is that all trafficking is sex trafficking, and that sex trafficking happens to young, cute females, and that all the traffickers are scary males. Usually, the victim is kidnapped. Well, the reality is that trafficking almost never looks like that. Hi there. My name is Kara. Thanks so much for the introduction. I work for an organization called the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking. We are based in Denver and we operate across the state of Colorado. And we've been doing anti-trafficking work in the state of Colorado for now 20 years. And I'm very, really honored to be here with all of you. Really grateful for all of your time. This is going to be a challenging presentation, a challenging conversation. It's kind of hard to sugarcoat human trafficking. So, just a little bit of a warning here that while I will never show scary content or anything violent on the screen, it's still a hard conversation to hear. And it's possible that people may be triggered. We're going to talk about immigration, we're going to talk about sexual violence. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is human trafficking of young people, and give you some referrals and resources and tips for keeping both yourself and your community safe. Um, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is vulnerability. What makes someone vulnerable, and why that vulnerability might play into a trafficking experience. Vulnerability is generally it's kind of a hard term to wrap our brains around, right? And so when we think about vulnerability, I want you to be thinking about your community, wherever that is, and who in your community might become vulnerable. We can think about it in two different ways. One might be around economics. Somebody might not have enough money, or their family might not be making enough money to pay their bills or pay their mortgage or have enough food to eat. Um, that may create a situation where someone would become vulnerable because they would have unmet needs. They would be maybe desperate or maybe scared that they might not have what they need, and so they might be willing to take risks in order to get what they need. So, one kind of vulnerability that we'll talk about today is economic vulnerability. The other kind is having to do with love and emotional security. A lot of people aren't getting the kind of love or the kind of acceptance or opportunity as others. Perhaps they live in a household where their parents fight a lot and their house doesn't feel like a safe place, or maybe they're a single parent household and their parent works a lot because they love them and because they need to work really hard to pay all the bills, but that might mean that they're not around very much and that person feels kind of lonely. The young person feels kind of lonely. Um, or maybe it has to do with their identity. Maybe it's a young person who is gay or trans, and their family doesn't accept that identity. And maybe they're facing violence or discrimination within their household because of their identity. And that might make someone vulnerable also. They would be looking for love, looking for acceptance, looking for safety, and that may lead them into potentially into a trafficking situation. So that's what we're going to talk about today is what makes someone vulnerable to trafficking, and then what we can do about it moving forward. So this term human trafficking, I think there's a lot out there sort of in the water, so to speak. So what I mean by that is what's out there in social media and on television and in the movies, things that you've heard about human trafficking. Maybe you've seen viral social media blasts about the issue. Generally, what we hear from the movies and social media about human trafficking is that all trafficking is sex trafficking, and that sex trafficking happens to young, cute females, and that all the traffickers are scary males. And in those kind of typical narratives that we hear, usually the victim is kidnapped, sometimes by like a scary white van in the Target parking lot or something like that. And then they're locked up in a basement or chained to a bed. That's the narrative that we get told over and over again. And if I'm being honest, it makes for good TV and it makes for good movies, right? The victim is kidnapped and they're trying to escape, and maybe somebody comes to rescue them. Well, the reality is that trafficking almost never looks like that. While it makes for good TV and social media, it doesn't make for good reality. It's really not what we see. So, what I want to talk about now is the kind of trafficking that we do see here in Colorado and throughout the US among youth. I'm going to talk about several different types of trafficking, including labor trafficking, sex trafficking, forced criminality. Um, and I'll define it for you, but I'll also tell you a few stories so that we can really understand some of the nuances and complexities of this crime. So, while most of the movies that you see or social media stories that you see are based on sex trafficking, the reality is that most trafficking that we see is labor trafficking. And maybe you've never heard of labor trafficking, um, because we really don't hear about it very much in general. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories about what labor trafficking has looked like sometimes here in Colorado. And as I'm talking through these, I just want you to be thinking about your own communities and the industries or the communities that you think might be vulnerable in your community. So we had a situation in rural Colorado in a farming community a few years ago where a farmer who owned a large farm paid a subcontractor to go find labor for his farm. So he told the subcontractor, I want you to apply for temporary work visas. I want you to bring people into the US to work on the farm. I want you to put them up in housing, and that will be our farm labor for the summer. Um, the subcontractor took the money and put it in his pocket, and instead of doing as he was told, he hired a smuggler, a people smuggler, to bring people across the southern border into the US from Mexico illegally. When they got to Colorado, um, he told them that they were going to work on this farm. He had promised them housing, but when they got here, the housing was a dilapidated, condemned building. It didn't have running water or electricity. It had animals living in it. It was a two-bedroom house, and he put 15 men into this house. The house was condemned, and so it had a 9 foot chain link fence circling the house to keep people out. And the business owner, the subcontractor, had cut that fence open and told these men that that's where they'd be living. He also had a trailer that he parked right next to the house and carried a gun, and he lived in the trailer. So he was always there, always watching them. He had promised them food and fair pay as well, but instead of getting that food and fair pay, they were told that they owed him $5,000 each for their visas and for the travel and for the housing he was providing them and for the food that they were being provided. And so they weren't being paid. All of the money that they would have been earning was going towards this debt. But remember, this was a debt that they hadn't agreed to. They'd been lied to about this debt. And so basically, they were working on this farm with no pay, living in a dilapidated building, never taking breaks, not getting enough food or water, and not even having running water or electricity in the building that they were living in. This is an example of labor trafficking. And we see this kind of thing happening all over the US. Um, not just in agriculture, but also in construction and in restaurants and hospitality, hotel cleaning crews, and in domestic service, where somebody is living and working in somebody else's home as, let's say, maybe a nanny. And they're not allowed to leave the home. They're not getting paid for the hours that they're working. In many cases, people's visas are taken, their passports are confiscated, and they're forced to overstay their visas, if they had them in the first place, and become undocumented. So that's a pretty common story that we hear. We're also hearing stories about unaccompanied youth, youth that come across the border without parents or guardians. And those youth are usually put with family members, lovely people who want to help and take care of them. But sometimes they're placed in foster families. And we've seen an uptick of some of these foster families being abusive and forcing those young people to stay out of school and to work, while the foster family takes the money that they earn. So, this is an example of young people being labor trafficked. Um, I'm sure that you've heard about sex trafficking. But again, the narrative that you hear is that sex trafficking is only happening to females and it involves kidnapping. But the reality is that most sex trafficking doesn't involve kidnapping. In fact, less than 1% of sex trafficking involves kidnapping. Almost exclusively, 99% of the time, the trafficker is someone that the victim knows, and it's often someone that the victim knows and loves. So, about 30% of sex traffickers are family members. About 40% of sex traffickers are intimate partners, like a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. That means that 70% of the time, the trafficker is not just someone that the victim knows, but it's someone that the victim knows and loves and probably lives with. And that's a lot of power for somebody to have. The other 29% of the time, the trafficker is someone that the victim knows but maybe doesn't love, like an employer or a teacher or a coach or a religious authority, maybe even a Boy Scout leader. We've had examples of those things, all those things happening here in Colorado. Um, think about it. Your teachers, your coaches, they know you, right? And they know which students might be vulnerable. They know which students might be facing economic or emotional vulnerability. And they can attach themselves to those students, develop relationships with them, and maybe start grooming them. And what do I mean by grooming? When I say grooming, what I mean is meeting their needs. So if a young person is feeling lonely, the teacher might say, "I'll be your friend. I can help take care of you." The student is financially vulnerable. They might say, "Well, I'll take you shopping. I'll help you to pay your bills. I can get you some money," right? So they're playing in on whatever the student's vulnerability is. And then after a little while of grooming, and that could take weeks or maybe months, eventually the teacher might say, "Well, now I've been doing all these things for you for a long time, and I need you to pay me back." Or "I need us to start making money together." And that's where the relationship shifts. Now the teacher is forcing that person to engage in sexual intercourse with other people for money or in exchange for something else of value. So it's manipulation, it's power dynamics that we're talking about here. In the movies, it's usually violent force that holds someone into a trafficking situation, but in reality, it's usually not. It's usually the emotional security that they're providing or the economic security that they're providing that's holding someone in. So that person has been groomed. They're now dependent on their trafficker for their survival and for love. And the trafficker is leveraging their power to force them to engage in commercial sex or other kinds of labor. That's what trafficking really is. And I want to address the gender piece because I think we generally think that all victims are female and all perpetrators are male, and it's just not true. It's actually closer to 50-50. So about 54% of victims are female. A disproportionate number of victims are LGBTQ, trans or non-binary folks are disproportionately affected by this crime because of discrimination and marginalization of their identities. And men and boys are trafficked too. In fact, men and boys are trafficked not just for sex, but also for labor, almost at that 50% mark. So trafficking is much more diverse than we think. It's happening to all genders, it's happening to all ages. About 25% of cases that we have involve minors, but the rest, 75%, involve adults 18 or over. And when it comes to the perpetrators, in all the movies, they're portrayed as scary men. But in reality, about 30% of perpetrators are female. And often the perpetrators look a lot like the victims because they're a family member or a loved one in some way, right? So if you had images of what you thought trafficking looked like before you came to this session, I want you to kindly delete them. They were likely not accurate. Trafficking is much more diverse than we think. The lived experiences of people are much more diverse than we think, and so are the traffickers themselves. Okay, another kind of trafficking that I want to mention is forced criminality. This is a thing that we are seeing popping up across the US as well, um, where especially young people and immigrants are being forced, excuse me, are being forced to commit crimes against their will. So, uh, I'll give you an example. We had a situation with a young man, well, a young boy rather. When he was very young, he grew up in a gang-involved household. His father was heavily involved in the gang, and for most of his life, he was taught about the work that the gang did, the crimes that they committed, and he was told that if he ever talked about any of this to anyone, then his family would be hurt. So he was a little scared of the gang, but it was also, part of his family. Um, he was taught at a very young age how to steal cars. And by the time he was 12, he was really good at stealing cars. Um, but mind you, when he stole the cars, it's not as if he sold the car and got the money. The money for the stealing of the cars was going to the gang. And of course, he was being told that if he ever talked about any of this, his family would be hurt. And so one day he stole a car and got caught, got arrested. And of course, he didn't tell law enforcement that anyone had made him do it. So he ended up in jail. The way that I met him was that I went to the jail. So here in Colorado, we can incarcerate kids as young as 12. Um, he disclosed to me in the jail what had happened. And we were able to seek recourse for him to try to get him out of juvenile detention, because he had been coerced to commit that crime. So, someone who's forced or coerced to commit a crime against their will for the financial benefit of somebody else is being labor trafficked. It's called forced criminality. It's quite common. And it's also quite common uh, for for the victim to never disclose and to be the one who ends up paying the price for the crime that was committed, the one who goes to jail and gets convicted and incarcerated of that crime because victims are too scared to tell anyone what's really happening. And also because they just don't know that what's happening to them is called labor trafficking, right? They haven't had a human trafficking training like you all are doing right now. And so we know that often trafficking survivors are being arrested, prosecuted, convicted, and incarcerated for crimes without ever being identified as victims. So, who are the traffickers? I've already talked about this a little bit. I gave you some examples. They can be anyone. They can sometimes be family members. Um, Sometimes they are outsiders. So we do see people making offers of false employment. We had someone going into a high school once. He pretended to have a modeling agency and he was going up to young girls and saying, you know, you're beautiful and I can give you a great job. Just call me. And he turned out to be a trafficker who had made up a fake modeling agency and was actually grooming young girls to be trafficked through that method. Um, we also see people posing as a boyfriend or a romantic partner, or even a caregiver, building trust among the victims and therefore building power, and then using that newfound power and trust to control the victims. And it's incredibly challenging for people to leave these situations. Remember, about 30% of traffickers are someone from their own family, and it's often somebody that they live with. And if you're a young person that lives with your trafficker, where are you going to go? It would be really hard for you to leave because you wouldn't have anywhere else to live. A lot of times traffickers are making threats, so they're threatening to hurt the victim or maybe their family. You know, something like, I'll do this or I'll make your 6-year-old sister do it. We also see traffickers using blackmail, like threatening to expose somebody in some way or share explicit photos with the victim's family or friends. Um, we also see traffickers use isolation. So they try to manipulate the victim to only speak with them, to lose contact with their friends and family, so that they're completely dependent on them for everything, for love, for money, for a place to stay, before they begin to exploit them. So people who end up being trafficked are not stupid or deviant. They're not making bad choices. They are people who've experienced some of the things on the left side of your screen now. Things like abuse or neglect or isolation, or maybe they're experiencing homelessness or they run away from home. Maybe they're experiencing poverty and they can't access the formal economy because they're too young to work legally. Or maybe they're being discriminated against because of their identity. And the trafficker is stepping in and offering them their basic needs. They're saying, I'll give you the love, I'll give you the family. We're like a family at my house. You can come and stay at my house. Or they're offering them a job that they really desperately need. Or they're telling them, I know that your family kicked you out because of your identity, but I love you exactly how you are. You are beautiful to me, right? Offering them that acceptance and that opportunity to thrive. And then they're shifting that relationship. And that's where we can do better. That's where we can do better as a society. If we could meet all of the people's needs in our communities, if we didn't exclude anyone, if we loved everyone equally, if everyone had access to all of their basic needs, then traffickers wouldn't have any leverage. They wouldn't have any power. This is where we can do better, again, as a society. We can be more inclusive. We can be more flexible. We can use our empathy to better understand what's going on in someone's life and why they're making the choices that they're making. Because people don't make choices to go with traffickers because they think it's going to be fun. They make choices to go with traffickers because they feel like they don't have any other choices. And maybe they really don't. They don't have anywhere else to live. They don't have anyone else to love them. We can do this better. If we could cut that part out of if we could meet everybody's needs, then traffickers would have no more power. So that's what I one of the big takeaways that I want you to have today. Okay, so I'm going to play a short video here. This video is from a survivor,
I want to
Ori, and she's going to tell a little bit about her story. And I'm gonna stop it. It's about 3 minute video here. Here we go.
Story. I am bold, brave, blunt, willing to fight, and that comes from a lot of the things that I've been through in my life. I was born in Chowchilla State Prison. My mother was fighting murder at the time when she had me. At 2 days, I was adopted by a single mother who worked 3 jobs in order to provide for me. I had a very normal childhood in the very beginning up until the age of 8, when I was molested by a family friend. By the time I was about 9.5, 10 years old, I experienced a rape, and there was no justice that was ever served. I didn't receive any counseling. My mother never had a conversation with me about it. I think it was very hard for her. So it was all these feelings of like insecurity and feeling like I don't belong, guilt and shame and dirtiness was bottling up inside. I ended up running away and met a friend. We went to this house, which was like a drug house. She left me and said, I'll be right back. In that house was a male sitting on the couch right next to me. For the first time in my life, somebody asked me, was I okay? After the rapes, after the molestation, after all the bullying, somebody finally asked me, was I okay? I told that man my life story in 30 seconds. And he didn't have to come and look for me. Like, he didn't have to come hunt like how normal traffickers do. I fell right on his doorstep. I was a kid in need. I needed shelter. I needed clothes. I needed food. And I was going to need someone to take care of me because I was only 11 years old. And I just remember this look in his eye was just like this. I got her. And he started to groom me. And then that grooming process is he was preparing me to be trafficked. And I remember just freaking out in the back seat, like scared. He got out, was yelling, why are you crying? And he hit me. I want to just go home. I want to go home. And he was just like, where are you going to go? Nobody wants you. And I believed those lies. And he grabbed me by my hair and dragged me down the street. My knees were scraping the floor. It was other women out there. Nobody did anything. When you have been forced to sleep with 7 to 15 men and be raped and be 11 years old, I was like slowly dying. And after the first night, you suppress those feelings because any inch of hope that you have, any sense of I can get out, any feeling of there's a God, any feeling of I don't deserve this, you get beat. You ain't gonna survive out there. By the time I was 12 years old, within a year, I was already raped over 4,000 times. It took me to be 4.5 years in the life until I was 15 years old for someone to finally step up and do something. And that was a man. His name is Jim Carson. And he was the first person in my life to tell me that I was a victim. It was never a choice. It's not a choice for these kids. Whether it was an influence, someone influenced them, whether it was somebody physically forced them into it. They're children whose dreams and innocence was stolen and snatched from them. Children who need someone to fight for them because they can't fight for themselves. Showing up when they don't expect you to. And saying, I care about you, I'm here for you, and I'm not giving up on you. I was starting to see what hope looked like.
Okay, I know that video is heavy, but I think it's important to listen to survivor stories, for those who are willing to share with us. I'm going to play more of Ori's story a little bit later in the presentation because she is an amazing human and is now working in the anti-trafficking movement to help survivors and to prevent trafficking among young people who are in similar situations to what she was in when she was young. Um, so we've talked about a number of these pathways to entry. How do young people end up in trafficking situations? We do have a lot of situations where parents are selling their children, where you might have a parent who might be drug addicted or could be behind on their rent and might allow access to their kid to pay for the rent or to buy the drugs that they need. It's terrible, but it does happen. Sometimes we see that seduction piece where you have someone pretending to be a boyfriend and then using violence and force to force somebody into a situation after they've seduced them. I talked a little bit about false advertising for modeling or acting or even for door-to-door sales crews. Generally, if somebody's offering you a job that seems too good to be true, it probably is. We also see peer-to-peer recruitment. And I want to be clear here that I don't think there's any such thing as good kids and bad kids. I think there's only good kids. But we do see some kids who are forced to become recruiters. So you've got a kid who's already being trafficked. They're being trafficked by, say, their boyfriend or maybe their father. And that boyfriend says, I need you to go get two more kids to be trafficked, or else I'm going to hurt your family. And so they're terrified. And so they go into the school and they start recruiting. And what that means is they're not saying, hey, kids, come be trafficked with me. They're saying, hey, I've got this really cute boyfriend and he's older and he buys me stuff and he picks me up from school. And it's so much, we have so much fun together and we get high together. And he's got a really cute friend and I want you to come meet them. Will you come with me? To the party this weekend or something like that, right? That might be, so it's subtle, right? People aren't being kidnapped, they're being seduced. They're being tricked into these situations. And that young person who's doing the recruitment, they're being forced to do that, right? They're not terrible kids, they're victims also. But they also look like a perpetrator in that situation. Um, and then the other way that we see this, in the big one for young people, is through the internet. So I want to talk a little bit about online recruitment and grooming now. We're seeing this all across the US as we become more and more dependent on the internet for basically everything that we do. Um, as we move our lives online, traffickers are moving their tactics online as well. So we're seeing traffickers recruit kids online via social media and also video games. We've had people meet traffickers in Roblox and other well-known video games just by chatting with them, right? So again, remember, recruiting and grooming is subtle, right? The person is pretending to be somebody in the same peer group as the young person. They're looking at kids as young as 9, 10, 11, 12 online. And they're saying, I'm around the same age and I'm whatever gender that person is attracted to. They're recruiting girls and boys, not just girls. And they're saying things like, you're cute and let's be friends and tell me more about yourself. And they're asking personal questions and maybe they're asking for pictures. And they're trying to learn as much as they can about you because the more they know about you, the more leverage that they could have, right? If they know you have a little sister, they could say, do this or I'll make your 6-year-old sister do it. If they know you have a dog, they could say, do this or I'll hurt your dog, right? If they know your parents are undocumented, then they could say, do this or I'll call ICE on your parents. So they're trying to learn where you live, what your situation is, as much information as they can. And then they'll try to usually take the conversation offline, so out of social media and onto your cell phone. Generally, they'll ask for a cell phone number and then they're texting, and then they'll start asking for pictures. So these days, I know a lot of young people send naked pictures of themselves to each other. It is definitely not something that I recommend. In fact, it can be really, really dangerous. But I know that a lot of people do it. So what perpetrators are doing is they're collecting those images. And then after a few weeks of collecting images, they'll say, well, now I have all these pictures of you, and they'll start to extort you. So they'll say, I have all these pictures of you, and if you don't do what I say, then I'm going to take all these pictures and I'm going to tag everyone you know, your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, all the kids in your class. I am going to tag everyone with these naked pictures of you unless you make an explicit video for me or meet me down the street or send me $5,000, right? And what's happening is the kids, young people don't know that this is pretty common and they're really scared and they think that they're going to be exposed to everyone that they know. and they think they've done something wrong. So they don't tell their parents or they don't tell their guardian, and they end up doing whatever the thing is that the perpetrator wants them to do. And we've had some really scary things happen when that does happen. So, my first bit of advice is to never, under any circumstances, for any reason, send naked pictures of yourself to anyone ever, even if you know the person, but especially if you don't. But also, if you have already, um, that's, not ideal, but if you have already, there are ways to walk this back, right? If somebody says they're going to tag everyone you know, uh, tell somebody about it. Tell your safe adult, report it. There are ways to get this kind of data off the internet. I know you've probably been told that once it's on the internet, it'll be there forever. And that's true unless you get a professional involved. And then we can help you to get that information off the internet. So report it, report it, report it. Don't do what the trafficker is telling you to do. Most of the time, their threats are empty. They're never going to follow through in the first place. They're doing this to a lot of people, and they're hoping that someone bites. So, um, other bit of advice is to never talk to anybody online that you don't know in real life. So don't give anyone your cell phone number. Don't tell anyone personal information about yourself. You can play video games with them, but just play the video games. Don't talk to them about your private life. Be very careful about how much information, how much private information you put about yourself on the internet. Perpetrators are looking for that information so they can use it as leverage against you. Be incredibly careful. Here are some red flags that someone might have bad intentions online. So, somebody asks to privately message you, or they ask for your phone number, and all they are to you is somebody you play video games with. So, there's no reason for them to privately message you or have your phone number. Someone asks if you're alone. That may mean that they want to send you some explicit content. They want to send you a video or a picture or something, and they don't want anyone else to see it. So that's another red flag. Um, if someone asks for your picture, be very careful with the kinds of pictures you send. Obviously, I'm saying don't send naked pictures, but also, even if it's just your face, be careful of what's in the background. A lot of times, traffickers are looking for clues, right? Your friends, your siblings, your dog, where you live. If you take a picture right in front of your high school, they're going to know that you go to high school there, right? So being very careful about the kinds of pictures you send and the kinds of pictures you post online. Anyone who says you're so mature for your age, this is a huge red flag. I hear it all the time. Wow, you're only 14, you look so much older. Or wow, you're only 12, you act so much older for your age, you're so mature, right? That's a very strong tactic because we all want to feel more mature for our age, and it feels like a compliment and we like it, and traffickers know that. Another one is you seem sad, what's bothering you? Because then the trafficker can say, "Oh, that's so sad. I'm so sorry that that's happening to you. Something like that happened to me when I was young too. Do you want to talk about it? Maybe we should do a phone call or a video chat." Or maybe they're saying, "You can meet me down the street. I'll meet you at McDonald's and we can have a conversation about this." Right? So you seem sad. What's bothering you? That's another big red flag. Or I know a way to you can earn some money. Usually, what that means is they're trying to make money off of you, right? If you need a job, talk to a safe adult in your life and they can help you to earn some money. If you're a teen that is old enough to work. But you don't want to get a job from a perfect stranger. They don't know anything about you or your community, and you'd have to give them a lot of information for them to be able to get you a job that makes sense for you. And you don't want to give that information to a stranger. Um, Someone who tells you that they love you when they barely know you. People don't fall in love with someone they've never met online. It's not safe and it's not normal. So if someone tells you that they love you and you barely know them, that's a pretty big red flag. And then the last one, if you don't do what I ask, I'll show everyone the pictures that you sent. This is a little bit more obvious because it means that they're starting to threaten you. But if anyone ever says anything like that to you, the conversation should end immediately and you should report it. And again, if you've sent those pictures, don't feel ashamed. Most kids your age do. I don't think it's a good idea, but a lot of people do, and I know it's very normalized. But don't believe somebody when they tell you that they're going to show everybody. Most of the time, it's an empty lie, and they're saying this to 100 kids, and they're just hoping that someone will send them some money or somebody will fall for their tricks. Okay, so how do you stay safe? How do you protect yourself against this? Um, Importantly, staying safe online, right? Good social media habits, screen your friends. You really have no reason to be friends with anyone that you don't know in real life. If you don't know them in real life, they could be lying about who they are, and most people are. So make your profiles private and do not uh, allow people to follow you that you don't know. Be careful with the information you share online. And then know your worth. Traffickers prey on individuals with low self-esteem. You are amazing and you deserve to be safe. Know your worth and don't let anyone tell you that you're weak because you are not. You are strong. Stay connected. Traffickers are looking for loners. You want to have relationships with family and friends, and that doesn't mean you have to have 1,000 friends. And having friends online is not the same thing as having friends in real life. So make sure you know who your trusted and safe adults are and reach out to them when you need help or are feeling lonely. Make sure you research a job offer before taking it. If the young girls who were recruited by that fake modeling agency had simply Googled the name of the modeling agency, they would have seen that it was a fake company. All you got to do is Google it and talk to your safe adult. Talk to people about the job offer before you take it and ask for help. Traffickers target runaways. In fact, it's really quite common. It's a very dangerous situation. So if you feel that you can't stay safely in your home, reach out to a trusted adult or call the National Runaway Safe Line. The biggest reason that we hear for young people not to speak up is that they were afraid of what the adults in their life might think of them. They thought that they were going to get into some trouble. And maybe even their trafficker was telling them that they were going to get into some trouble. Don't be afraid to speak up. I know it's hard, but there are people that are trained professionals that are here to help you, like the organization that I work for, the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking, or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and there's lots of others. So speak up. If the trafficker is telling you that you're going to get in trouble, they're lying. Don't trust the person that's trying to extort you to tell you the truth, right? You will not get in any trouble. You have done nothing wrong. The last thing that I want to show you about is the hotline. So what I'm showing you first is the Colorado Human Trafficking Hotline. Um, but on the next page, I'm going to show you the national one for those of you who are not in Colorado. Not every state has their own human trafficking hotline, but Colorado does. It is a tip and referral hotline. So you can call in a tip to law enforcement and let them know what's going on. Or you can get resources to help you or a friend of yours if you've been trafficked, or even to connect to those resources to help you to take any images offline that have been posted on there. You can call us 24/7. If you don't live in Colorado, there's also a national human trafficking hotline for all the other states. So I'm showing you both of these numbers. If you're in Colorado, I would call the Colorado number. If you're in any other state, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and we work the same way. We work together, as a matter of fact, all the hotlines. But I want you to know about these numbers. I want you to know that you can remain anonymous if you want to call. You don't have to give us your name and information. For some of the situation, I mean, if you want us to take something offline or something like that, we're going to have to know more information about you, obviously, in order to find those images. But If you're just calling in for some resources or to ask questions, you don't have to tell us your name or any information about yourself. You can remain anonymous. I just wanted you to know that. Okay, I'm gonna play the rest of Ori's story because I want you to hear about what an amazing person she really is, and what she's doing now.
To see what hope looked like.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being so open. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what sex trafficking looks like. For example, a lot of people picture, the van with the dark windows and women that are chained up. But in your case, it was manipulation. At 11 years old, I remember wanting to be liked and wanting to feel like I belong. Like, that's all that man needed to show you.
A lot of times, too, a misconception is people automatically think it's somewhere else. Like, it doesn't happen here.
Yes.
It doesn't happen right here in our backyard. A lot of times, that's why we call it the invisible crime, especially nowadays because of social media.
Yes.
Like, traffickers are using social media in order to recruit young girls.
Okay, this is so important. I think a lot of parents tend to be naive when it comes to social media.
As parents, we think, not my kid.
Yes.
My kid is smart enough to not talk to a stranger. And all it takes is a click of a button, and now I'm following you. And now I'm on your page, and I'm seeing that you're a minor, and boop, now I'm in your inbox. And now we're having a dialogue and a conversation.
But also, people think it's a certain type of person. It's the dirty old man who is going to buy sex with a child. But from your experience, it's the guy you would never assume, right?
It's not. It's men who are married, men who, different professionals in the field. I've had conversations with these men after things had happened in that hotel room or in that apartment, and talking about their children, talking about their wives. Like, this is a reality and what's going on. Like, it's not what we think.
So they're having sex with a child and then just kind of matter of fact telling you about their own children?
And going home right to their own family. It's crazy.
You are such an incredible example of the fact that our past doesn't have to define us. If you hadn't told me your story, I wouldn't know. You're full of life, you're vibrant, you're funny, you're gorgeous. And the fact that you've gone through this hell and you are now using it, you're working with Saving Innocence, which is an organization that is working to end sex trafficking.
Yeah. Everything I went through in life was in order to be able to help someone else. I got hired on a Saving Innocence about 1.5 years ago. So I go into the juvenile halls, the same juvenile halls I used to be at, and I get to work with the kids on prevention work. I get to be that person that I didn't have when I was a kid.
The fact that you're using all that pain that you've been through to now help others is so inspiring to me.
You can overcome anything. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a victim of sex trafficking. It can be divorce. Mm-hmm. It can be your kids are driving you crazy, or your kids are just trying to figure themselves out. And to know that it doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
And that I can always send the elevator back down for someone and lift someone up instead of tearing someone down for what they've been through. Everyone has a story. We all have been through something that has affected us and has made an impact in our lives that can help someone else out.
But instead of letting that stuff define you, you are using it to help people who are walking through the hell you walk through.
Because it's just only one small part. It doesn't define me. It doesn't define us.
Do you know your worth now?
Yeah, most definitely.
Love it.
Okay. Oops. That's all I've got today. I really appreciate everybody's time again, and I'll make sure that my contact information is shared with you. I'm gonna try putting it into the chat, but I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it or not after you view this. So I'm going to put it into the chat now, and I'll make sure that the organizers of the event also have my contact information, so you can contact me if you have any questions or want to learn more about trafficking. You can also go to our website, which I'm also putting into the chat. It's combathumantrafficking.org to learn more about human trafficking in Colorado. Thank you so much, everyone.